Welcome, everybody. This is our Florida Citizens Alliance Congressional District 19 Primary Candidate Forum. It's our third forum, and we're really glad you could join us. We're glad to have the candidates with us, and we think we're going to have a wonderful discussion this afternoon and help all of us as voters be better informed by the time it comes time to cast our ballot. My name is Rick Stevens. I'm a pastor in Cape Coral and also one of the managing directors of the Florida Citizens Alliance. Florida Citizens Alliance is a 501c3 nonpartisan coalition. We work with everybody to try to improve K through 12 education in Florida. We also provide forums like this and contested primaries to help voters be better informed. We want to focus on the issues that are before us. We want to help the candidates tell us their principles so we'll all know what to expect from them as we cast our ballots. We're really glad for you to have the opportunity to hear from all of them. Our desire is to help the candidates get their message out to you. We've invited all the candidates that qualified for the primary, and many of them have joined us today. Some of them could not. One of them, I need to tell you, is Dane Eagle. He and his wife have been expecting a baby, and we received word earlier this afternoon that it's time. So
that's awesome.
Dane and cheering for him and for his wife. We think that's pretty exciting.
We've all been waiting for this baby.
We're glad for that.
Is that an acceptable excuse, though, for missing a forum? I don't know.
You must not be married.
We hope that's acceptable. Well, we want to begin by giving the candidates the opportunity to introduce themselves. And so I drew names earlier this afternoon. They're in no particular order. The first candidate I had on my list wasn't on the call or on the web conference yet when we started. If he joins us, we'll include him later. But we want to begin with Daniel Kowal. Daniel, glad to have you here. Have an opportunity to take a minute to introduce yourselves to our audience.
Well, it's great to be here. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, well, it's great to be here, and I appreciate the invitation as always, and everything you guys have been doing for this campaign. Well, my name is Daniel Kowal. I'm a U.S. Army veteran, lifelong law enforcement officer, a family man, and I consider myself an American patriot. I've never been a politician. I never ran for office before. This is my very first time, and I felt it was another call to duty, like I had early on in my life, to go join the military. And I feel it's very important this time because what's going on in our government and what we're seeing happen right before our eyes in a short 19, 20 years, how much it just changed. And the leadership in Congress with the Democrats running it right now, how far left it's gone. And I feel that I need to get myself up there, start writing this shit, push it right, because it's been leaning too far left too long. So I'm here. I'm going to do the best I can. I'm going to run, and good luck to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, and welcome. Glad to have you here. Next on my list, as I drew it up, was Darren Aquino. Darren, welcome. Glad to have you.
Hi, I'm happy to be here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. I'm Darren Aquino. I'm so happy to be here, part of this forum, so that they can hear the voice of the people. We're also candidates, and I'm happy to be here with all of you. A little about me. Well, I come from a military and law enforcement family. I was disabled when I was young. I have a disability that you have for life, and I had many challenges. I became a national advocate for our first responders, our veterans. They needed a voice. They were neglected. I had more work after 9/11 to secure benefits and entitlements of this great nation. They overlooked our vulnerable. For 35 years, I was the strongest voice for that community of individuals who were deprived. And I couldn't figure out why, because they were honorable men, law enforcement, first responders, our veterans. They were neglected and deprived. Now they're homeless around the country. And these are the things that motivated me to become a congressman, because further neglect is going on. When you have 35 years of unwavering, faithful patriotism to this country for our most valuable, now they're vulnerable and they're neglected, you have to stand up. We're all Americans. I'm not only a candidate, I'm a voter. And it's important to exercise that vote, to put the men and women that deserve to be in Congress, the ones that we're going to look to for leadership. And now, in the controversy in our country, we need leadership. We need it more than ever before.
Thank you, Darren.
Congress,
Thank you very much. We need to, I'm going to give, I'm a moderator. Father Horsey's a moderator. My name is Bob McClure. I'm sorry to be the bad guy there, but since you haven't been on some of these before, we'll give you a mulligan on that. Keith is keeping time, and to be fair to all of our candidates, we need to kind of honor that. So first one's a mulligan, no worries. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your service to this country. Pastor Rick, please proceed.
All right, thanks, Darren.
Thank you.
Next up is Christy McLaughlin. Christy.
Well, thank you again for having me. I appreciate it. So my name is Christy McLaughlin. I am a proud Southwest Florida native, born and raised. I went to Florida Gulf Coast University, then Ave Maria Law. I have been a lifelong resident, and this is my home. The reason why I jumped into this race is to protect it, because we have had far too many congressional representatives who have been dishonest or insincere in their motives for protecting Southwest Florida. Now, if we look at what's going on in our country today, we have Antifa that is encouraging rioting and looting across our nation. They're burning down businesses, they're burning down our cities, and it is destroying our country. And what we've seen is that it is complacent leadership that has led to this. And not just complacency, but it's insincere leadership of representatives who are conservative, then they actually don't implement conservative values. I don't stand for that anymore. The young conservative and the youngest person in the nation running for Congress, and a shout out to Madison Cawthorn, who is 24 years old and just won his primary. He's a few weeks older than me. We are working towards the future of this country. That is our job.
Thank you, Christy.
Thank you.
Thanks, Christy. Let's go now to Byron Donalds. Byron, you're up.
Pastor Rick, Keith, to the Florida Citizens Alliance, thanks for doing this again. It's good to be back. My name is Byron Donalds. I'm a candidate for United States Congress here in Southwest Florida. I've lived here for 17 years. I'm a husband and father of 3 boys, 17, 12, and 9 years old. Well, he's 16, he'll be 17 next month. Listen, I got my start in politics in the Tea Party movement. I lived here for a very long time, and during the financial collapse of 2008, I decided to not listen to what the media was saying about Tea Party rallies. I actually went out to them myself and found out that there were people who really cared about the future of this country, and I got involved. From there, I was elected to the Florida legislature in 2016, and I have the record of being the most conservative person running in this race by record, but also one of the most conservative persons in the Florida legislature. And I want to take that record to Tallahassee, to Washington, I think it's important that we have a strong conservative representatives up there, and that's why I'm running for Congress, and I hope to have your vote.
Thanks, Byron. Welcome. Glad to have you here. Let's go now to Dan Severson.
Thanks, Pastor Rick, and thanks for the opportunity. This is a great event. I am Dan Severson, running for Congress, Navy Top Gun fighter pilot. Got to do a dream that I had when I was a kid, and that was fly Navy fighter aircraft. I was officer in charge of an F-A-18 squadron, Top Gun qualified. Went on to Washington, D.C., spent 3 years in D.C. doing plans and policy, and then the executive officer for a weapons test squadron doing R&D. So I've got some background in the whole acquisitions for arms and those type of things. I went on to get elected to the House of Representatives in Minnesota and served for 4 years in the majority, 4 in the minority, 2 as the minority whip, where we held back $3.2 billion in tax increases. And when you talk about having a conservative record, that's a great thing when you have both the House and the Senate and the governor. But when you're contending with the Democrats, which we will be in Congress, there are significant tests, and how we deal with those tests is really a matter of experience. And so that's why I believe I am the best qualified in this process to represent the voice and the people of Southwest Florida. We moved here in 2015. This has been our home. We love this, and we are on the water, and water is a big deal to me. So Dan Severson for Congress, Severson for Congress. And
thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. Next up is Cindy Bonnier. Cindy, welcome to the forum. Glad you could join us.
Hi, yeah, thank you so much. So I am Dr. Cindy Banyai, candidate for Congress here in Southwest Florida. I'm a mom and small business owner, and I'm fighting for our water, our health, and our community. So I have been here for the past 11 years building my family. I chose Southwest Florida for its beauty and for its people. And I have been working here to help organizations become more efficient and effective. And that's something that I want to take to Congress. I think it's something we desperately need right now. I've also been somebody who's been very connected and committed to the people. Through my work here in Southwest Florida, I've worked with hundreds of organizations and convened thousands of people, telling them I'm going to bring their voice to be on the same level as politicians and CEOs. And every time I take that report up to the leadership, they pat me on the head and say, thanks, and don't do anything about it. So that's one of the main reasons why I'm running, to be the voice of the people of Southwest Florida and Washington, D.C., so that we can make a Southwest Florida where the sun shines on everyone.
Thank you, Cindy. Glad to have you here. Really appreciate you joining us. We're going to have Dr. Fig now introduce himself. Dr. Fig?
Thank you, Pastor Rick, and thank you, Florida Citizens Alliance, for inviting us to this forum. My name is Dr. William Figelstaller, and I'm running for Congress for District 19. I'm of the belief that our founding fathers intended real people who represent the district to go to Washington as congressmen and bring ideas and represent our nation. I grew up in Sarasota, Florida, a conservative Catholic family, 7 kids in the family. My parents celebrating 60 years this year. I found out I was going to be a father when I was 16 years old. I ended up getting married. I was a single father by 22, but I worked my way through medical school residency, arrived in Naples, and little by little, I built my medical practice into one of the biggest healthcare conglomerates in the state of Florida. And that's the American dream. And now with 5 grandchildren, I want to preserve that American dream. And I believe that my going to Congress with the experience that I have will best represent District 19 as a conservative, constitutionalist American. And I thank you all for joining us tonight. And I hope that you can see the differences between us as candidates. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm really glad to have you here. Now, we mentioned earlier that we were expecting David Holdeman to join us, and I don't know what happened. We had some kind of a glitch, but David let me know he was having trouble, and we've got it worked out, and he's here now. Sorry, David, I don't know what happened. We apologize for that, but we're really glad you persevered, and we're glad to have you here. We'd like to give you the opportunity for that 1-minute introduction.
All right, thank you. Appreciate you getting back to me with a link that worked, Rick. I am David Holden, Democrat running for Congress in the 19th District. I was the Democratic nominee in 2018, and I'm also a Joe Biden delegate to the Democratic National Convention, which will be happening, it seems, in this room. So we've got 4 interlocking crises going on right now in our country: the COVID pandemic, the economic collapse associated with that, the ongoing threat and reality of global warming, and the current ripe efforts to deal with systematic racism. We have seen very little leadership on any of these issues from the current administration, both in Washington and DC. And it's time for solutions to real problems that meet the needs of working Americans and working Floridians. I believe with my experience, my commitment, and my values, I'm the person to do that job.
Well, thanks, David. We're glad to have you here. Always glad to have everybody participate in these. And I think we've managed to get everybody in now. So let's move to our moderators and the questions. We all are familiar with the way we've been doing that since this is our 3rd round of this. We allow the candidates 1 minute to answer the questions. We have 2 moderators. We do allow rebuttals at the moderator's discretion. For example, if a candidate mentions another candidate by name, the moderators may allow a rebuttal, and we'll leave that entirely to them. The moderators choose the order that the candidates answer the question, and the moderators have the sole discretion over the questions they ask. The Florida Citizens Alliance does not tell the moderators what to ask, and we do not tell them what they cannot ask. It's up to them. Some people in our audience may have submitted a question for the forum. We've let the moderators know about the questions, but again, it's up to them to choose the questions and to decide which ones to ask. The candidates have been given a couple of surveys for them to complete, and we have those copies, but the moderators do not. But the moderators have the questions, so they may choose to ask a question or 2 from those. Again, that's up to them. Our first moderator tonight is Father Michael Orsi. He's from St. Agnes Catholic Church in Naples. He's been active in the community for quite a long time, a terrific gentleman, and he has a real way of cutting through the baloney on today's issues. And we're glad to have him be a part of our forum. Welcome, Dr. Father Orsi. Our second moderator is Bob Bad Guy McClure. Apparently we found out he's the bad guy that gets to interrupt all of us. So we're glad to have Bob here. He has done a wonderful job for us. He's the president and CEO of the James Madison Institute, Florida's premier free market think tank. JMI is the nation's oldest and largest 501c3 nonprofit, nonpartisan research and educational organization. We're really glad to have Bob join us. So welcome, Bob, and I think I'm going to throw it to you and let you and Father Orsi take it from here. So welcome, and thanks for helping us out.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you. That's a lovely intro. I'll take that any day. Maybe I should run for the 19th district. All right. Question number one. The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, FISA, is up for reauthorization. Do you have any concerns about FISA being reauthorized? Dr. Fig?
Well, I have concerns about the way that it's been implemented. If you're going to spy on an American citizen, which the intention of the act is so that if somebody's talking to a foreign government and there's the risk of espionage or information that could damage our country, that's taken very seriously. And unfortunately, many of these types of things are enacted in the name of safety of our people, and they end up taking away our rights because they're misused. I would be for FISA to be used with careful restrictions, and when those methodologies are not followed, the people should be prosecuted. For example, James Comey and the people who abused the FISA process in the most recent scandal, they should be prosecuted for that so that the FISA warrant is not being abused. But we need to have a means of investigating if our country is under threat or under risk by a foreign country.
Okay. Dr. Bonnier, any concerns about reauthorizing FISA?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we need to take in careful consideration how we are surveying American citizens without them knowing. For me, the biggest issue with the FISA Act comes when, under the Bush administration, how it was used for domestic wiretapping and to invade the privacy of everyday Americans who have been found guilty of no crime. And so I think that we just probably need to look a little bit further as to how we can protect our country from foreign agents who want to infiltrate and want to do harm to us in terms of our intelligence and our understanding and our legislative process and our government process overall. But that maybe we need to have a little bit more than secret courts and a wiretapping of American citizens. So those are the biggest concerns that I have with FISA that I'm going to have my eye in the 117th Congress.
Okay, Mr. Donalds, what do you think about FISA? Have any concerns?
There are major concerns with FISA. I think when it goes through reauthorization, and I think that the Congress is probably going to reauthorize it, there has to be additional oversight coming out of the legislative branch, and I think that's really the purview of the intelligence committees, both House and Senate. Should have a lot more purview when FISA actually takes actions against American citizens through wiretapping and other surveillance measures. Simply because what we can't really allow in our society, in a free society, is that these tools which are used for terrorist surveillance and surveillance around foreign nations who want to do us harm, we don't want those being turned back on our country, on our citizens. So I think there has to be greater oversight from Congress in both houses, the House and the Senate, and that's I think where you start. There's other reforms in FISA that need to be done before it's reauthorized, but I think it's one of those things that's going to be here to stay for quite some time.
Okay, Mr. Severson, any concerns about FISA being reauthorized?
Yeah, I have some major concerns. I think if we look in light of what transpired with the Flynn case and with the FISA court and the Steele dossier that was put forward, and it was noted that these were fake dossiers and that the FBI, Comey, and Clapper, all of those put those forward knowing that they were false statements. And once that came out, the judges, the FISA judges, should have had the opportunity, should have, in fact, come forward and slapped a contempt charge on those individuals and started the process rolling. So we've got some collaborative things going on with the judiciary and with the defense, the DIA, all of those processes. And I think when Congress comes back for the reauthorization, there needs to be a significant tightening and some implications for not following the law in that process. That has to be on the forefront. We cannot have a two-tier justice system.
Thank you. Ms. McLaughlin, any concerns about FISA?
I have severe concerns, because every time we continue to have this government overreach that infringes on personal liberties, because we have seen that the FISA court's surveillance domestically in the United States has infringed upon our privacy rights, which is in the penumbra of the United States Constitution. Not to mention that the FISA court's abuse has been not just the Bush administration, but the Obama administration as well, against our own president, President Trump, in which there was falsified information brought up to the FISA courts in order to surveil on our president's campaign. That is not just an abuse of the American people and their own privacy, but it's an abuse of the democratic process and the voting process of the United States. It's a major threat, and we need to have some serious reforms. I would like to see some more subpoenas and more investigations into those abuses, and we need to reform the FISA Act.
Thank you. Mr. Kowal, what are your concerns about FISA?
I could probably talk 2 hours on this subject. Being a federal agent at the time in Washington, D.C. in 2001, and after the FISA was implemented by the George Bush administration, we got to remember this was brought on because we had 4,000 American citizens killed within hours that morning on our soil by 19 people with box cutters. We were so behind the 8 ball on what terrorist cells lived within our community amongst us. Okay, the FISA system is a system. It was designed to work. There's a lot of moving parts to it. But the problem is when you implement people into a system like that don't use it properly, that's where your issues come in. And that's what we saw against our President Trump, was the people that were in place that used the FISA warrants and the FISA courts, they misused it. If it's used properly, it actually saves lives. It was what we had to do at the time to make sure we didn't lose any more American lives. Now, that being said, it does need some more oversight because we cannot ever let it be used again in that capacity. Okay, like I said, there's a lot of moving parts to it. To even get to the FISA court part, to even get the warrant, there has to be a lot more things through the NSA, a lot more things that had to be collected.
Thank you, Mr. Kowal. Thank you very much.
Okay. Mr. Holden, what are your concerns about FISA?
Well, I'm just enjoying this broad-based agreement amongst all the candidates. I think we all share real concerns about how the FISA court has operated under multiple administrations. And I think in any reauthorization, those oversights have to be increased and they have to be strengthened. There has to be as much transparency as possible, balancing our national security. But the FISA courts and the overall Patriot Act implementation, you know, we are a long way down the road from the tragic events of 9/11. We've learned a lot. We've strengthened our security, but we have to make sure that we are balancing that security with civil liberties, civil rights, and individual right to privacy. So I will be paying very close attention to that as the next member of Congress from the 19th District, and I'm very gratified to see that there's so much broad-based agreement on this point.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Aquino. Your thoughts?
Well, I have some concerns as a civil rights advocate. An infringement on a citizen's privacy is very important. But this was very important. What? Oh, this was very important because of terrorists being here in the country after that 9/11. So I was there for that. And what's bad about it is when there's misuse, like we've seen, it comes out of the taxpayer's pocket. So the misuse of it, like that went on against our president, is a problem. But it has to be tweaked, but it is necessary because we have terrorists here in the country. We're calling them homegrown now. Look what's going on. It's in the middle of this Antifa. This is not regular citizens out there that are being violent, murderers. This is horrible. But to use this in an inappropriate way, like they've done, again, that falls on the taxpayer. We have to tweak it. It is necessary, but we have to run it appropriately because we're in difficult times right now. But spying on average, normal citizens and law-abiding citizens, we have to find a ground for it that it works more successfully and not intrusively. That's the best way to approach it.
Thank you. And I am unanimous in this. Okay, next.
All right, folks, thank you very much. The first question, there have been a lot of discussion about what and whether Congress should do anything next in terms of dealing with the economic crisis that we're focused on. We've heard a lot about more stimulus dollars. We've heard a lot about more checks going out. We've heard about payroll tax cuts and those kinds of things. But we've also seen, if you saw some of the headlines today, over 1 million dead people received stimulus checks from the federal government in the most recent mailing. So my question to you is this: what, if anything, should Congress do next? And please be specific. If you could wave your magic wand as a congressman or a congresswoman, what should Congress do next to help us deal with the economic crisis that we are facing as a nation? Starting first with Ms. McLaughlin.
Thank you so much. So we need to open up the economy. I've always been saying so since the beginning when they were first actually considering closing down the economy and implementing these safer at home orders. This was extremely devastating for our economy. People who lived paycheck to paycheck no longer could live their normal lives. There was an increase in domestic violence. There was an increase in depression, drug abuse. Now, we have a huge national debt now. We're getting beyond $26 trillion. And my solution, as if I'm elected to Congress, is I'm going to hold China accountable. Now, I've always proposed that the $1.3 trillion debt that the United States owes to China needs to be forgiven because China is the culprit for this devastation of our economy. They were dishonest about the threat of the virus, whether it was human-to-human transmission, and they worked with the World Health Organization to ensure that the United States was not prepared. So we need to hold China accountable.
So just as a quick follow-up, the answer specifically is that to the economic crisis we're facing is to focus on China and holding them accountable.
Well, that's one way we can start working against our debt is we can actually remove some of that $1.3 trillion debt and no more stimulus bills.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Aquino, what are your thoughts on what actions Congress should take specifically next to face this economic crisis?
Well, you got to look here in Florida. The hospitality industry is the majority of the business here. They're small businesses. They were affected. All of this stimulus went to personal folks and some other organizations and went out. But still, the small businesses are hurting. We have to do and look at that and take action for the small business to save them. They're the backbone of the country. The biggest problem, yes, I know somebody that got one of those checks that their father was dead and they got the check. So there's no oversight out there. Money went here, here, and here, but it didn't get focused on where it's needed. We need to regenerate and pump up the business, the small businesses, because that's the heart of our state here. So we have to focus there. If we need a stimulus, it needs to go to the small business. And then we could put tax like a $1.35 covert tax to regain some of the money because it's a sensible amount of money and we could recover some money back, but we must take care of those small businesses that were affected. They were hurt bad.
Thank you very much. So to be clear, the focus by Congress should be on getting money in the hands of small businesses. Is that correct?
Pretty much, yes.
Thank you very much. Mr. Severson, your thoughts on next steps by the Congress?
I think the first thing Congress needs to do is identify those businesses that are currently in China, those that have been shipped overseas, identify those and the critical needs that we have for America, and bring those businesses back. And we do that by creating incentives with some of the monies that have been put out there that have been illegitimately got, retrieve those and use those as a base grant for these businesses to come back and start businesses here in the United States. I think that on an issue of national security, we have to be able to use the drug industry, for defense industry, those things that are critical to our infrastructure and for our national security need to be located in the United States. And what Congress can do is create some incentives through business loans and through some grants to be able to fund those businesses to operate here within the United States.
Thank you. Mr. Holden, your thoughts on next steps by this current Congress?
I do believe that we are going to require further stimulus, and I think the best way to provide that stimulus is to put money directly into the hands of working Americans. When working Americans and families have money, they use that money in the community, and that helps small businesses. I wish we had followed the lead of countries like Canada and Great Britain, who guaranteed a certain percentage of income for as long as it takes, because it's clear to anyone who's paying attention to the facts that we are still in the midst of a terrible pandemic. Certainly here in Florida, cases are skyrocketing. Certain areas of the country are reaching capacity in their ability to care for people. And we've got leadership in Florida that's cooking the books and changing how they count deaths and who lived here and who's visiting here. We also need to make sure that we have transparency on the hundreds of billions of dollars of stimulus money that went to corporations. But the way to deal with stimulus right now is in the pockets of working Americans.
So to be clear, Mr. Holden, you're saying you believe in a form of guaranteed basic income?
That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that during the pandemic, we need to stimulate the economy by putting those stimulus dollars into working families.
Great. Thank you very much. Ms. Bonnier, Dr. Bonnier, your thoughts on next steps for Congress?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with everybody here that there was a lot of problems with the stimulus check going out, and it's really just another failure of the Trump administration in their oversight and management of this biggest failure in history. So I absolutely agree with all of you on that. But what I think is really important here for us to know is that there are ways that we can get back on our feet in our economy. And the way that I think that we can do that is through making sure that we have a guaranteed universal employment. And we start with the stimulus package that is coming in, making investments into our infrastructure, investments into the public good. This is a very important thing, not only to get everyday Americans back to work and back to making an income to help their family, but also these are investments in our economy. We need infrastructure to have a strong economy. If we do not have strong roads, bridges, ports, airports, we cannot function. Small businesses and large businesses. So this is something that our government should absolutely step up and do to make sure that we get back on track.
Thank you, Dr. Bonnier. Mr. Kowal, your thoughts on what the next Congress should do?
Okay, well, the initial stimulus package, there was a need for it because at the time we had no clue how bad this COVID virus is going to be and what the possible death rate due to the virus itself. And the government shut us down. I mean, they shut down businesses at no fault of their own that were working properly, that were functioning and making money, and they were profitable. But they were told to close down, so it's not their fault. And I think the government had a little bit of responsibility to get out some initial stimulus because they shut them down. But now as we're reopening, we need to reopen. We just need to get out of the way because these businesses are not broken. They've just been held from allowed to do their business. And they were fine before the virus struck. And we need to let them get out of the government, get out of their way and start opening back up and start working again. And the problem is you give another stimulus package, and like some of the people were saying, if you give it directly to the employee, they have no motivation to come back and work for that small business owner. The business owner needs their employees to come back, but if they're getting money to sit at home, it's a two-way street there. You can't expect them to want to come work if they can sit at home and make the same money. So we have to have some motivation for these small businesses and to go ahead, get out of the way, get the government out of the way. Do not give another stimulus package, especially with Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats running it, because they'll just put more earmarks in it, just like they did to the Kennedy Center and things like that had absolutely nothing to do with this shutdown. So
Great.
No, not give them another.
Thank you, Dr. Kowal, or Mr. Kowal. I appreciate it very much. Dr. Fig, your thoughts on what the next steps should be for our Congress?
Well, the idea of getting the economy to recover is to get everybody back to work. I certainly wouldn't recommend another stimulus package, but what I would recommend are the reforms on SBA loan processes. Right now, it's very difficult if a business owner wants to get an SBA loan, you have to have it collateralized 3 times over. You've got to have key man life insurance and prove your pro forma, et cetera. We need to streamline that so that you look at factors such as the history of the business prior, you know, the experience of the people that are putting forth the business, and make it easier for business owners to get these loans. Secondly, I would go for a capital gains cut and cut business taxes further. And eventually, I would like to pass a reform on income tax to a flat tax, which would allow everybody to take advantage of growth of the economy. Those are the things that I would do if I had a magic wand. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Fig. And finally, Mr. Donalds, your thoughts on what the next step should be for this Congress?
Well, specifically, this Congress should not do anything with respect to stimulus. I think that there were a lot of great answers that I agree with most of them. You have to look at business regulations across the board. You have to begin to look at the ones that are either outdated or outmoded, not necessary in today's economy. The biggest thing is capital, free-flowing capital into businesses large and small. One of the things that's not being talked much about is that Secretary Jay Powell at the Federal Reserve, he is committed in his testimony that the Federal Reserve is going to do just about everything it can to provide capital into the system during this time. I'm not a fan of the Fed constantly priming the pump, but in this situation, because of all of the actions they're doing, Congress should not do anything else. The other part is that we have to reopen our businesses and let people get back to work. If you look at what's going on in Florida, specifically hospitalization rates, even here in Southwest Florida, have not risen to the point where we're concerned about our hospital system. So people need to get back to work. Businesses need to be allowed to flourish. The biggest thing Congress could do, frankly, is cut regulations and do no more.
Thank you, Mr. Donalds. Over to you, Father Orsi, for the next question.
Okay, now this is well, none of you have been elected yet, but I want to ask you about term limits before you get elected. Do you think that there should be term limits for Congress and the Senate, and then for how long? Mr. Donalds, what do you think?
Well, I will tell you, I absolutely do believe in term limits. I signed a term limits pledge, and you know, currently I do have the honor of representing House District 80 in the Florida legislature, and I wouldn't have gotten to the Florida legislature if it were not for term limits. And so I think it's important that we bring that to Washington. Look, let's be clear. Some of the biggest issues we're having in DC, whether it's debt, deficits, the fact that Congress never can get anything done, is the fact that you have members that have been there for far too long. They have power bases unto themselves, and they know they're not leaving. And so I think it's time, you know, here in America, that if the president can be term limited, if many governors in our states are term limited, then members of the United States Congress, both House and Senate, need to be term limited as well. We do need to have fresh people moving back and forth into our government, and that's something I fully support and will work on in DC.
How long?
How long? 8 years.
8 years, Congress? What about the Senate? What about the Senate?
For the United States Senate, I could support 2 terms, which will be 12 years. But in the House of Representatives, where you run every 2 years, 8 years, yes.
Good, thank you. Dr. Bonnier, term limits, what do you think?
No, this is why. So term limits, what they do, it sounds good in principle. And I'll tell you, this is something that I've evolved on. Term limits make it seem like we're going to get new people in all these representative positions, but we have elections for that, right? That's why we have 2-year, House of Representative elections. It's supposed to be the fresh new faces coming in. When you take term limits and put them in place, you shift the power base away from both individuals and the people and towards corporations, because corporations have the ability to fund continuously campaigns, right? Regular people don't have that capacity. And so when you shift that power base, because you always have to have a pipeline of brand new people coming up, they're going to be in bed with corporates and corporate PACs. Thanks to Citizens United, this is even happening even more today. It makes them more powerful, and it allows them to buy seats. And I fundamentally believe in democracy and the people to choose who they want to represent them.
Okay, thank you. Something to worry about any time limit with you. Okay. Mr. Severson.
I have signed the term limit pledge. I'm a little mixed on the leadership style that goes in with term limits, because you have people who know the system, who become the corporate knowledge for those things, and you need an extensive memory system so you're not continually recreating the wheel in that. But I do believe that because of the power structure that we have in Washington, D.C. right now, and the way it is geared towards those who have been there the longest, who have the influence and then create the favors, and all the things that are antithetical to our republic, that term limits are the answer. I believe four terms in the Congress and 2 in the Senate would be sufficient. And I believe that, again, when you get back to the originating founding fathers, people didn't live for 30 and 40 years to serve in Congress. They did it, and they did it as public service, and then they went home. So I believe that term limits is an immediate answer to that, but there needs to be some type of hybrid that allows leadership, some small percentage within the caucus, to be able to maintain continuity.
You concur with Mr. Donalds? You concur with Mr. Donalds on the number?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, I do.
Okay, good. Okay, Mr. Holden, term limits, what do you think?
I don't support them. I think I trust the American people to choose their own leaders, but I understand the impulse behind them and why they have become so popular. I know there are things we can do to reform the system so that we will have greater turnover in our elected officials. We have to reform how we finance our campaigns. We have allowed Citizens United has opened a floodgates of dark money, billions of dollars spent by folks we're not sure who they are to influence our elections. And the other reform we need to make is to end partisan gerrymandering. So when we allow politicians to choose their voters, instead of letting voters choose their leaders, we run into situations where people accrue great personal power. If you look at a state like Iowa that has gone to a nonpartisan commission for gerrymandering, they have much more competitive races, they have higher turnover, and their candidates tend to be less extreme.
So we can expect you to be around a long time in Congress.
I'm not saying that.
Okay, Mr. Kowal, what do you think? Term limits?
Yeah, I'm all for term limits. Listen, it's just like this 1 minute you give us to answer this question. We got to work really hard and really fast to try to get our point across, but we have to do it because we know we have 1 minute to do it.
I'd give you more. It's McClure, not me. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
What I'm trying to say is,
reclaim some time.
Congress is the same way. If people know they only got an 8-year term or a 10-year term, and they have issues that they got to bring from their people and they want to get it done, they're going to work that much harder because there's nobody else. Everybody else is going to be on that same time. They're going to be on that same clock. So they're going to work together to get things done and get it done in time before they leave. And I have a feeling that that's probably the best way we'll start getting things done, because things sit in committee in Congress for years and years and years and never make it to the floor, you know, because they know they're going to be around to do it again and do it again. And who wants to save these corporations money? Because if you don't think they don't get people elected now, you're crazy. So if they had to pay every 8 years to get people elected, you know, let's take a little bit of money out of their pocket, put their money where their mouth is, and who they're going to elect. But right now, they just pay once, and the guy stays there for 30, 40 years.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. McLaughlin, at your age, you could be around for 100 years. What do you think?
I could, hypothetically, but I'm so in favor of term limits that here's my vow. I will be in 6 years. I think term limits for Congress should be just 6 years, because if you can't get the job done in that time, you shouldn't be in that office in the first place. You have no business being there. Now, the reason being is when you have career politicians, in fact, one of my opponents mentioned that we were claiming that it's oversight of the Trump administration that caused the issues with the stimulus bill. It's actually the opposite. It's career politicians and swamp creatures like Nancy Pelosi that implemented a bunch of nonsense into the CARES Act, into that stimulus bill, that caused all these problems to begin with. And there's a lot of things that are not getting done. Now, this idea that, oh, if they are elected every 2 years, then you can have new, fresh faces is also farcical. Because once you're an incumbent, it's almost impossible to beat that incumbent, given all the power that they've gained through this political prowess that they have. They have political power that they've used, and that's why they've
Thank you. We'll hear a lot more from you. Dr. Fig, I mean, what do you think about term limits? Have you ever seen a swamp creature?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, a long time ago. Yeah. Why do you ask?
Reclaim some time, Fig. Go ahead.
Yes. We Washington is a swamp, and term limits would help to resolve that. Government is intended to be run by citizens who've actually done something in real life, built a business, had a farm, have something to bring to Washington and build consensus and represent the nation. And I don't think that government was intended that you go through the state house and then you go to U.S. Congress and then you go to Senate and you go to, it was intended for citizens. 3 terms in Congress, 1 to 2 terms in Senate is plenty. And if it's longer than that, you're going to lose your business on the outside. It's intended that citizens who have real business go to Washington and help out. And as far as the special interests and so on, I think that the fact that somebody has money to help get their message out means that they've worked and they've actually done something in the real world versus.
Thanks, Dr. Fig. We're running out of time, but we have to talk to Mr. Aquino. What do you think about term limits?
Well, that was at my BOPAC speech. It's term limits is #1 on my platform because there's oligarchy there because they overstay their welcome. Our forefathers wanted a refreshing and a renewing. I laid out a plan that I think we should extend the term of Congress to 3 years and cap it at 3 terms. So that way they can get more done in the district in 3 years. So if we cap it at 9, that would be good. And then there's an imbalance between the Senate. The Senate would stay there 2 terms. That's what I pledged when I spoke at the BOPAC, because we have to get rid of the oligarchy. They're staying there, overstaying their welcome, and look what's going on. They want to give $150 million outside of the country to keep their interest going. And we can't have that. We have to take care of the country and to refresh and renew like our forefathers wanted us for Americans, working for America, to keep it flourishing and going strong and not making a career out of a congressional seat. It's a duty and a responsibility. It's not a job.
Thank you. That's novel. 3 years instead of 2. Okay, great. Dr. McClure, I didn't miss anybody, did I?
Nope.
Okay.
Nope. You're in good shape. Let's talk about mail-in voting, voting in general, voter fraud. We all want our voters, people who want to vote, because there clearly are people who just choose to sit out the process for whatever reason. We want them to be able to vote. But we're also, I'm sure, all very much on the same side when it comes to concerns about voter fraud. What are your thoughts about the voting system, not only in the state of Florida, but across the country? Clearly, we don't have a federal system, so it's a slightly different question. But as a congressman or a congresswoman, you will have certainly a television camera to talk about this. What are your thoughts about mail-in voting, concerns about voter fraud, and the opportunity for everyone to vote as needed? We will start with you first, Mr. Kowal.
Okay. Well, I turned 18 in 1984, and I went into the military right after I graduated high school. And that was my first opportunity to vote. I voted for President Ronald Reagan. I'm very proud of that. And I served under President Ronald Reagan. And mail-in ballots at that time were just for people in the military that was abroad, that was overseas. That was the system, and that's what we used it for our soldiers and sailors that were abroad. And everybody else had to go to the polls. And that's the way our forefathers wanted it. On election day, they didn't have early voting. They didn't have mail-in voting. You went to the polls. You were motivated. If you were motivated to pick a candidate, you were motivated to go to the polls. Now, I was out on the front lines during this COVID pandemic. I was standing in front of Costco guarding toilet paper shipments from people rioting over toilet paper. And I can remember seeing people with walkers, with oxygen tanks, standing in line for 2 hours to get inside of Costco. Okay? I think if people are motivated to do something, they're going to do it. And if they're motivated to vote, they're going to vote.
Great.
I don't think that's an issue.
Thank you, Mr. Kowal. Dr. Fig, your thoughts on voting?
We absolutely need to make sure that people are voting legitimately. I'd be all for voter IDs. I think mail-in voting should be reserved for people that clearly are unable to get to the polls. It needs to be taken very seriously. I would definitely be in favor of having forms of identification, voter ID. And the other thing is that for buying an airline ticket, for getting into any public setting, just about, you have to have some form of identification. And then for the most important thing, voting for our elected leaders, you don't even need an identification. So I would be all for that. And as I said, I think for the military and for people who are unable to get to the polls, maybe a doctor's excuse or something like that, then they would do mail-in voting with some form of identification.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Fig. Mr. Severson, your thoughts on voting?
Yeah, I ran for Secretary of State in Minnesota in 2010 and 2014 for this very reason, because there was corruption at the ballot box, because they had people piling off of buses, going to different voting stations, and had people vouching for them, which totally undermines not only the local elections, but our federal elections. That's why Nancy Pelosi was pushing so hard for this mail-in ballot under the guise of being a COVID safety measure. And it's got nothing to do with that. This is about corruption, and it is about usurping the people's right to have a legitimate voting process. I believe that President Trump is right on when he talks about a national photo ID law that goes across the country. We have California, you got Chicago, you got places, Minnesota, that are to the core in their voting status, and it's a problem. We need to address it and get rid of the ballot harvesting that's taking place even in Florida.
Mr. Donalds, your thoughts on voting?
Listen, first of all, voting is the biggest franchise, the best franchise, the most important franchise of every American citizen. But, you know, like we've done in Florida, it should be protected. I think the one thing, if you look at how voting has become really a political argument, is voter ID laws. I've lived in the state of Florida since I was 17 years old when I first got here to go to college. I've always had to use my driver's license to go to the polls. It hasn't been a problem. I haven't been, my right to vote as an American citizen wasn't taken from me because I had to present my ID. Yet this is what the Democrats try to portray across the country. I think with respect to vote by mail, it is something that is a part of Florida voting, but our laws here in our state are the best in the nation. What we can't allow, and one of the things we just got finished changing, was dealing with ballot harvesting, where you couldn't have somebody go around picking up 50 absentee ballots. You're allowed to take yours, and you're allowed to take one other person who's an immediate family member of yours. That makes sense. Things like motor voter laws, same-day registration, not requiring voter ID, being able to pick up 100 vote-by-mail ballots, that's what destroys the franchise, and that's what cheapens our vote, and in some respects makes it illegitimate. Those are the things we need to be doing in the other 49 states, like what Florida does here.
Thank you, Mr. Donalds. Dr. Bonnier, your thoughts on voting?
Yeah, absolutely. Voter fraud is not really the issue for me. It's voter suppression. If we actually look at the incidence of voter fraud, it's extremely small in this country. There was just a recent analysis of vote by mail across 3 states that found a 0.00025% fraud rate. So that's like way beyond any statistical significant rate of return that you can think of. It's better than the rate of shrinkage in the Walmart and retail industries, right? So why would you want to mess with an institution that has such a high success rate, frankly? And in fact, the people who are often the ones flouting them are people who are affiliated with the Trump administration. Jared Kushner and Sean Spicer are both registered to vote in 2 states, and the president himself fraudulently filled out his ballot, putting an out-of-state address on his vote by mail. So what we really need to think about is not why there's such an emphasis on voter fraud, but why we're trying to suppress the vote from the American people overall.
Thank you, Dr. Bonnier. I do have to say, moderator's discretion, those are some serious accusations you just made. So moving forward, Ms. McLaughlin, your
I'll post them on Twitter.
Voter suppression, or I'm sorry, voting in general.
Right. So I don't know what Cindy's talking about with those very serious allegations that she made against our president. But just to make a joke, Daniel turned 18 in 1985. I turned 18 in 2013, and I voted ever since also. Not very long, but, I vote in every election. It is a huge issue with voter fraud. We need voter ID. And it's not a coincidence that when the radical leftists are pushing to enforce mail-in ballots, it is coming at a time where we have different countries, including China, that are printing fraudulent mail-in ballots and preparing to flood our country with false mail-in ballots. That's been established. It's on the news. So we do have a huge issue with fraudulent voting and falsified voting. And voting is a privilege. It is a huge privilege. Now, when it comes to voter suppression, it is not as big of an issue as Dr. Bonnier is trying to point out. In fact, they try to allege that people don't have access to an ID. Of course we do. If you don't have access to an ID, it's not due to suppression. There's no enforced suppression that's causing people to not have an ID. And in fact, my great grandma's 101. She has voted with me ever since 2016. We go together to the ballots, and she might be considered someone at risk for the COVID-19 pandemic. But you know what she told me a couple days ago? She said she's excited to vote in person in 2020.
Thank you, Ms. McLaughlin. Mr. Aquino, your thoughts.
Good area. I sent the president a plan to stop voter fraud. I sued the Board of Election in 2014. This was led by a Democratic coup in Nassau County. That's a criminal empire to control that state. And it's done within the Board of Election. I sued them in 2014. I came up with an idea. I sent it to the president email last month. Fingerprint driver's license. And it's a cross-reference, because if the state has the ID, they can fraudulently put it in. But if it cross-references in the computer to verify, thumbprint, driver's license goes in, it scans, and it just references through. And the one that holds the thumbprint is Social Security. It's a sure win. It can't fail because the fraud is there. They wait for election day, the Democrats, to do this. It's very big with them. That's why I sued them. There's a federal case. That's why Kathleen Rice is in Washington. She don't belong there. She's there illegally. But the president has this, and this is the way, because disabled voters don't get to vote. They're left in the hospital. I brought out the vote in 2014, going to the hospital bed. That's what Dr. Fig was talking about, those needing that mail-in. I got it figured for that too. Right to the bedside with the laptop, fingerprint.
Thank you very much, Mr. Aquino. And finally, Mr. Holden, your thoughts on voting.
Wow. So voter fraud is virtually non-existent in this country. It really is about voter suppression and voter access. In case you haven't noticed, we are in the midst of a terrifying pandemic, 120,000 dead Americans. We need to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to vote the same way President Trump does, by mail. Florida has one of the most advanced vote by mail systems. This district votes roughly 70% by mail in a regular year. I expect that to be a lot higher this year, and it's a terrific system. In Oregon, all of their elections are conducted by mail. We don't want to suppress the vote. We want to make sure that everyone has a chance to vote, but we are in an extraordinary crisis, and we have to ensure that everyone has the opportunity to vote by mail if that's what they desire.
Thank you very much, sir. Father Orsi, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Over about the last month, ever since the tragic death of George Floyd, the country has been in turmoil. And one of the accusations leveled against the country is that racism is systemic in American society. I'd like you to address that. Is racism systemic in our society? Ms. McLaughlin.
So this concept of systemic racism, it means that the government is implementing racism through legislation, and that is not true. There is no systemic racism, especially based on that definition. So what we've seen with the destruction of our country in the name of George Floyd are not even mourners of George Floyd, or no one who's actually trying to protest in response to police brutality. This was an abuse by Antifa, a terrorist organization that had nothing to do with George Floyd. They were opportunists waiting for an opportunity to destroy our country, and for complacent legislators in the state and federal level to allow the destruction of our nation. And that's burning and looting and destroying small businesses and lives. I've personally encountered Antifa when they stormed Trump Hotel last summer, and they are a terrorist organization. They are radical, and this has nothing to do with systemic racism. It was opportunism.
Thank you, Ms. Bonnier. Dr. Bonnier, systemic racism exists in America?
Yeah, and actually it's really disappointing to hear Christina say that systemic racism doesn't exist in this country, considering she took an entire course from me on systems thinking in this. But I think that just proves that, I'm not a very good indoctrinator.
What grade did you give her?
However, I think that systemic racism is...
What grade did you give her?
I actually got 110%.
She was a star pupil, everybody. She was a star pupil. I'm not going to lie. I have to get over having like a proud, teacher moment every time I hear her talk. But it doesn't mean we're going to agree every single time. However, so on systemic racism, what this means, it's not that it's legislated exactly. There's a lot of implicit bias. There's a lot of things that happen in our government sponsored programs that keep people from accessing things in the same way. And it's particularly affected the Black community in our country. And we've seen this in redlining, we see it in where polling locations are put, and we see it just in the way that everyday citizens are treated by the police, which is exactly why we have these, responses in the movement right now. And frankly speaking, there's like 100 people who are Antifa. I don't even really think it's a thing, because I'm pretty sure that I would know them, and I don't. So and I just don't think it's a real problem. Now, there are people who are trying to instigate, but that's not the issue.
We're on overtime. We're on overdrive. I think so. Mr. Donalds, what do you think? Systemic racism?
No, I don't think that there's systemic racism in the country. I do think, unfortunately, there are still some people who are racist in the country. I've encountered them myself, but do I think it's a form of our society or of our government? No, I don't. There was a time in American history where, yes, there was institutional and systemic racism. Could you make the argument that even today in America, that we still are feeling some of the fallout of that existed in America? You could make that argument. But to say that today we have a society where our police forces are systemically racist, absolutely not. Especially if you look at the situation where most of these tragedies that have occurred with police shootings or with people dying in the hands in police custody has occurred, frankly, where the police chiefs are Democrats, the district attorneys are Democrats, the mayors are Democrats, the city councils are Democrats, the governors are Democrats. So if it's a failure of anything, it's a failure of liberal policy in our urban corridors that have caused the inequalities, so to speak, that the left likes to talk about. But I don't believe there's systemic racism.
Thank you. I think we're on overtime. Mr. Kowal.
If you don't mind repeating the question, I had to exit.
Yeah, do you think racism is systemic in the American society?
No, and I'll speak from my position as a professional law enforcement officer. Last year we had 365 million contacts, according to the FBI Crimes Report, with citizens between law enforcement officers. And 0.5% of those contacts turned into some sort of situation where law enforcement was found to do something wrong. That is a very, very, very small percentage of 365 million contacts. You gotta remember, law enforcement every day, day in out, day, 24/7 a day are contacting citizens in our country, okay? Racism is some leftover in some people. That's an internal thing. That's a person thing. That's an internal, evil inside certain people. Are there still some racist people in this world? Yes, there are. But is the system racist? No. And we shouldn't use it that. It should not be used in that manner. It's systemic. I could take the Florida statute book, and like Christine said, I will bet anyone on this panel or any leader in any community to show me inside a Florida statute book where any law is written just specifically to use against minorities. And you can't.
Thank you. On overtime, Dr. Fig, systemic racism, yes, no?
No, we do not have systemic racism in our country. We have people of all races and genders, and frankly, all sexual orientations that have achieved the highest levels of success in every sector. Our country is built upon individual exceptionalism, and the opportunities are available no matter what gender, religion, race, or whatever that you hold. I think there's a danger in using identity on either side. There's a danger in using identity to pander and expand a party, and I think there's a danger in being prejudiced against any race because of stereotypes that you might have. Now, there are people that are racist and prejudiced, and we as intuitive people and educated people must not stand for that. And I will not, and I don't think anybody here would do that. But it does exist, but not on a systemic level.
Thanks, Dr. Fig. Mr. Aquino, systemic racism in America? Yes, no, maybe?
No, not at all. If that was so, I'm a minority and Byron's a minority. We're both in this as congressional candidates. Is there individual racism? Yeah. In Lee County, they excluded me because I was Latino. and it was a Latino dominant area. Why I say that? Because people use this in power to rule. Those folks that are out there, Antifa, those were the very same folks with masks before there was a pandemic, and I saw them in Washington at the president's inauguration. 2 of them approached me with a mask. I had a cane because of my leg, and I was standing there, and they came up on me, and I picked the cane to defend myself. This is an organized group, and it was generated by Democrats. No ifs, ands, buts about it. I watched them approach me like terrorists with masks. The same ones you see them now that they got the whole face covered so you can't get a grip on who they are. So no, there are individuals that don't like you because I'm Puerto Rican, or they won't like Byron because he's black. But me and Byron, there's no systemic problem. I love Byron. He's out on the street and somebody said something, I'm right there with him.
I go through the same thing. They find I'm Italian. Mr. Holden.
I know, I get that too. I got that going on because I'm half Italian and half Puerto Rican.
Oh, you got the best of all worlds. Mr. Holden, what do you think? Systemic?
Yes, of course there's systemic racism. We're a nation of immigrants, but only one group was brought here in chains. And systemic racism has been, unfortunately and sadly, it is fundamental to our original founding documents. We have made great strides since then, but here's how we know it still exists. You know, my father was a U.S. Army infantryman fighting in Germany in World War II, and he received the full benefits of the GI Bill, which meant he got to be the first member of our family to go to college, which opened the door to the middle class for my whole family. And he had got to get a mortgage that he could afford. But many thousands and thousands of African-American veterans do not have access to those same benefits. So those racist policies, they occur very subtly and very informally. They're part of our culture. They're a part of how banking is done. If you look at the differentials in police violence in communities of color and white communities, it's pretty clear that systemic racism is still a problem we have to deal with.
Thank you, Mr. Holden. And Mr. Severson, what do you think? Racism systemic in America? Yes, no?
No, I do not believe it's systemic. I believe that the First Amendment to the Constitution guarantees us the right to assemble peaceably. And all of the falderall that took on with Mr. Floyd's death was legitimate. The things that transpired after that were a Marxist takeover. And when you talk about some of the funding that has come in from Black Lives Matter, if they were really serious about Black Lives Matter, they'd be over in Syria, where Black African Americans are still being sold into slavery. So this is really just a cover for undermining our Constitution, undermining our system of government. America is the only place where we have such a large gathering of individuals from across the world that gives every individual the opportunity to succeed on their own merits and on their own personal responsibility. I had a good friend who was from the Somali community. And when I met with him, his words to me were, I love America. I would die for this country. He came over.
Okay, we got to move on. Back to you, Bob.
Thank you, Father Orsi. Let's follow up that question with this idea and the thought that's floating out there when it comes to police reform or police defunding. Obviously, that has been in the news quite a bit with the tragic passing of George Floyd. What are your thoughts on police reform versus police defunding? And if you believe in reform, name at least one reform that you believe should be implemented when it comes to the police. So police reform versus police defunding. Mr. Donalds, you're first.
This is a very important question and a timely one. I think that defunding the police is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard in my life. We need police officers, law enforcement officers in all of our communities. Because truth be told, they are the ones that help to maintain peace in our streets, that maintains our civil society, and that maintains the very fabric of our nation. With respect to police reforms, I do think that there are some reforms that have to take place. If you look at the bill that, frankly, the Senate Democrats just killed, that Senator Tim Scott put forward, there were many provisions in there that I think are appropriate. The biggest one being a federal database on issues associated where there is a situation where somebody is either brutalized or killed when they interact with a police officer. So there's more data, so that leads to better reform if it's necessary. But most of those reforms, frankly, should happen on the local level, in police chiefs and in our sheriff's offices.
Thank you, Mr. Donalds. Mr. Severson, your thoughts on defunding the police versus police reform?
I think defunding the police is an absolute bad idea. And I think in terms of police reform, I do believe that most of that is local issues. Most of those are with individual police officers. I think with the incident that took place with Mr. Floyd, that was an individual bias, and that should not have precipitated the reaction that it did, because he's going through those officers are going through the judicial system. They're being adequately charged. And I believe that that was a pretense for a much bigger action. And it has caused mayhem in our police departments, where people who love our country and are serving our country in that capacity are being challenged and unduly harassed. So I think that there needs to be additional items identified, like the chokehold outlawed. But beyond that, I believe that they do it for the right reasons, and we need to support them unconditionally.
So one of your reforms, to be clear, would be the outlawing of the chokehold. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Ms. McLaughlin, your thoughts on defunding versus police reform?
When I first heard the term defund the police, I assumed it was a joke because it's that farcical. I've been on a ride along. I spent 5 hours with a police officer on a Friday night here in Collier County, which is one of the safest places in the country, in my opinion. And we still, I saw them answer to so many domestic violence cases, a couple of theft issues, drug abuse. There was one drug overdose, in fact, and a fire. We cannot defund our police. They're keeping us safe. And we had a bad apple. We had a couple of bad apples, and that has been responded to. They're being held accountable. So accountability is the issue when you have individual abuse within the police force, but it's not an issue of the police force in general. And it's a local issue. Don't forget that it's the Democrats that were in charge of those local areas in which the police brutality incidences occurred. One quick note, I am Latina, and I am, I think, the only person that speaks Spanish in my home. And this concept of minorities using an opportunity to try to push an agenda against our police officers is just terrible, and I don't support it.
Thank you, Ms. McLaughlin. Mr. Holden, your thoughts on defunding the police versus police reform?
Well, we certainly need fundamental police reform. We ask too much of our police. We have police in almost every school in the country. I grew up in New York City in the 1960s, not necessarily the safest time in that city. And maybe we had a police officer there for career day. We have to end zero tolerance policies in our school to break the school to prison pipeline. We also need to fund non-police responses to mental health and drug emergencies. And if you look at what Sheriff Rambosk is doing in Collier County, he's a leader nationally on mental health treatment and drug treatment and training his deputies. But that's not the job of the police. That part of their job needs to go to trained professionals to de-escalate violence and to get people the help they need. But we also need to end qualified immunity for police officers so they are held responsible and accountable for their actions.
Thank you, Mr. Holden. Mr. Aquino, your thoughts on defunding the police versus police reform?
Well, let me talk to a Democratic friend there who grew up in New York in the 60s. So did I. And the policing was good then there. The cops were good to the kids. It was a different time. So you're not correct. Defunding the police is wrong. We need them. My brother's a cop. My nephew's a cop. My son-in-law's a cop. And they put their lives on the line every day. What they do need is better training. I was at the funeral of Ramos Winjalu, Mia Sotis Familia. And this violence that came about, I told the mayor, we need advocates for the police. I saw the sheriff. I'm the solution for the homeless and mental ill problem. I was with the sheriff and Commander Gifford. I'm the guy they came to for the problem. I'm working on that now. They need help. They shouldn't be handling that. When Eric Gardner got killed, there are certain things that are obvious. Cops protect and serve. They're not medical professionals. I told the mayor, let's put in advocates. He laughed. But that's Bill de Blasio, another Democratic thinker, like Mr. Holden. You see, we can't have that thinking. We need the police. I'm family of law enforcement. I defend law enforcement because they defend us.
Thank you, Mr. Aquino. Mr. Holden, I was just getting ready to say, you get 30 seconds, Mr. Holden. You get 30 seconds.
Mr. Aquino, you're misrepresenting me, and I think you're doing so on purpose. Yes.
Misrepresenting you?
Can I
misrepresenting
Wait,
you?
Mr. Aquino, let him, he gets his 30 seconds. You called him by name. Let him have his 30 seconds. Let's start. And Mr. Holden, hang on one second. Keith, let's start that 30 seconds over. Starting now, Mr. Holden.
Yeah, I support the work of the police. They're critical to keeping our community safe, but they have to reflect the highest levels of professionalism, and they have to be held accountable for their own actions. We have seen over the last 20 years, since 9/11, the militarization of our police. Military work and police work are two very different functions, and I think we do our country a disservice when we conflate them.
Thank you, Mr. Holden. Dr. Banya, your thoughts on defunding the police versus police reform?
Yeah, so saying defunding the police is a little bit of a misnomer. Obviously, so people would pay attention to it. Much like what David was saying, is we really need to reallocate funds to where they need to be to community better. This is why I'm actually a proponent of participatory budget, making sure that we are putting money and dollars into areas that we need, like mental health services, like homeless services, like better protections in our schools and things like that. Say a little bit, why are we talking so much about New York? Why is nobody Florida? And going back to the issue of systemic racism, we have a report in Fort Myers of the Fort Myers PD that demonstrates that we had systemic racism, internal and external to the police department, consequences in our community. And we have a police to make continued reforms to ensure that there's a good relationship with the community, that police are staying what they need to do, and the community is being served with the dollars that they put into it.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Banya. Mr. Kowal, your thoughts on defunding the police versus police reform?
Okay, well, it's dumb even thinking about defunding the police. And the sad part is, like with a sheriff's department, it's a constitutional office, and there's a constitutional responsibility to provide protection of third party. So law enforcement is needed. The problem is when you start defunding things, the only thing that's going to suffer are the programs that we put in place, like your CIT program that David was talking about, which I went through, which started, I believe, in Nashville, Tennessee. It's a critical incident training. So when you do come to people who have mental health issues and how we can diffuse it and make it safe for them to get more treatment. Those kind of programs will suffer, okay? Because we're the first responders. We're the first ones on scene. There's no doubt about it. And what will happen is we'll just be no longer proactive. We'll be reactive. We'll go there. We'll take the report after the crime has already happened, after the woman already was battered by her husband or vice versa. We'll take the report. But there won't be no proactive work out there. We spend hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on trying to convince people and the citizens to like the police again. When I grew up, everybody liked the police. Okay? We have programs, coffee with a cop, cookie with a rookie. I mean, it's ridiculous. We spend.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kowal. I appreciate that very much. And finally, Dr. Fig, your thoughts on police and policing, police reform.
Yes, we absolutely should not defund the police. What happened in the case of George Floyd is an absolute tragedy, and it should never happen. And we don't want anybody that encounters the police to be treated with any kind of disrespect. In this particular case, it was that individual that had that issue, and there was a huge reaction to that was hijacked by Soros and by people that aren't even related to the police department or to the issue. But we need Senator Scott's bill, the Justice Act, would have been a great way of increasing transparency and accountability in policing for when there were incidents, and also, focusing on better training and funding. It is a state and local issue of exactly how they handle their policing, but at the federal level, by increasing transparency and a database for issues and accountability, and making sure that any federal dollars are being used on training and not for leisure activities. That would be something that we could do at the federal level as well.
Thank you, Dr. Fig. I believe that's everyone. Over to you, Father Orsi.
Okay. Last week, Supreme Court handed down a 6-3 decision, Bostock decision, and the court said that LGBTQ plus people have the same civil rights that were extended in 1964 to not permit discrimination between biological males and biological females. I would like your take on this decision, and what concerns do you have regarding this decision? So, Ms. McLaughlin.
Hi there. Sorry, my battery's running out for some reason. I thought I was plugged in.
You're plugged in. Keep going.
All right. So, I'm very supportive of this decision. It was a very constitutionally based decision, and it was the right choice. Neil Gorsuch is the one that wrote the opinion. Neil Gorsuch is a true constitutionalist, and it's based on constitutional values of personal liberties and the fact that we are supposed to create and allow freedom and equality for all people. And discrimination cannot be based on gender, sex, sexual orientation, now that that's included, age. Those are constitutional values that are very important for the Supreme Court to uphold. And it is very in tune with former Supreme Court decisions as well. And it is important to establish strict scrutiny for that issue because we cannot have discrimination. So I support it. Neil Gorsuch was 100% right. He is a true constitutionalist. Yeah. And I have to figure out this plug-in thing because it's about to die.
Thank you. Dr. Bonnier, your student has just spoken. What do you have to say? How do you feel about
agree.
How about that?
We agree. So yeah, I do think that this was a very important decision. It really precedent that sexual orientation and gender identity are a component of that needs to be protected, and that you can't be discriminated against for that. And I think that's an extremely important thing. And, and I said in this forum before, I mean, the one in America is freedom, and that freedom means I don't have to explain anything to you. Freedom means I don't have to tell you why, right? And that's kind of what is being now extended to our employers. And so I think that we really need to continue to uphold this, that we need to continue to have protections up and down our government from the federal to ensure that people are protected in who they are and cannot be unfairly discriminated against in their employment in particular because of how they're living their life.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Severson, what do you think about the decision and perhaps some implications?
Yeah, I think this is a very bad decision. I think in terms of magnitude, probably on the level of Roe v. Wade. One of the things that we're seeing is the whole transgender issue and how that plays out in our culture and our society. Just last night, they had a discussion on how men are participating in women's sports under the transgender title and really pushing women out of the spots that they would normally be able to compete equally. That's just one. There are a number of them. And the other part I believe that is discriminatory is the behavioral. When the Supreme Court initially was making a determination whether it was discriminatory, they used 5 indelible principles. So religion, race, a number of other things. None of them had to do with homosexuality or gender identity. And so they have come a little progressive in this whole process, which I think is going to have catastrophic consequences in our culture in the future.
Thank you. Mr. Donalds, what's your take on the Bostock decision?
I actually disagree with the decision. I disagree with the opinion. A couple of things. We've actually been in the state legislature, we've been reviewing this legislation for the last couple of years. The reason it doesn't get heard is because when you're looking at protected classes with non-discrimination law, the original protected classes were there because they were actually, going back to a previous question, discriminated on an institutional and systemic basis. That's why sex is gender is your sex is protected. That's why women can't be discriminated. That's why frankly by race you can't be discriminated, and it's also why by religion you can't be discriminated, because there have been times when that existed in America. We've not had a point where there is systemic racism based upon gender identity or sexual orientation. And one of the key things about this is what this decision does, it actually puts employers, especially employers of religious institutions, in a real legal lurch that can have significant problems going forward. I don't agree with the decision. If they were going to do anything, they might have tried to use equal protection, but even equal protection has been abused by the court on many different levels.
Thank you, Mr. Donalds. Mr. Kowal, what do you think about the Bostock decision?
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot of working knowledge how this got to the Supreme Court and what exactly what discrimination was done to this individual that got it there. I know that they did use the decisions that were made back in, I believe, 68 or 69 with the gender and case that went to court and the Supreme Court ruled on it and said you couldn't discriminate due to gender. But I don't think they thought that far forward. Now that we're talking about people that were born as a male and that identify as a woman and things of that nature. So I don't know the exact reason where this got to the Supreme Court. So I don't want to make a blanket statement one way or the other, that because I don't believe anybody should be discriminated against. Okay, that's just not right. As a human being, you shouldn't be discriminated against. As a human being, you should never look down on another human being unless you're helping them out. Okay.
You don't see any implications though of the decision. No implications.
Yeah, it's just I wish I knew more about the case.
Okay, good. Thank you, Dr. Fig.
Honest about it.
I disagree with the decision. I think that, and I disagree with Gorsuch's opinion. I think that it was an example of overreach by the Supreme Court. The original Civil Rights Act included groups that were discriminated against, and it included, male and female sex, religion, and race, and those are not included in sexual orientation and gender dysphoria. This was complete government overreach. That would have been something that should have been taken up with Congress. I think that Justice Alito had a great dissent, and hopefully the next judge that we appoint to the Supreme Court will be an originalist and a constitutionalist.
Okay, Mr. Holden, what thinkest thou? You like that, huh? That's how we talk in Brooklyn.
Yeah, I think it's a great decision. I agree with Christy, and I'm always thrilled if I can say that. And
hey, Dr. Boniek's class?
I'm becoming a little bit of a Gorsuch fanboy because his thinking is so clear, and his ability to parse the issues is just really exceptional. Certainly in this case. Yes, it's the right decision, and the reasoning was excellent. But I believe we have to go further because we've seen that, everybody pays lip service to supporting LGBT rights, but rights without protections are just empty promises. So I will co-sponsor the Equality Act if I am sworn in next January. I believe that's an essential piece of legislation. And I will urge President Biden to undo the executive orders of this administration in removing rights from trans Americans, including their right to serve in the military.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Aquino, your thoughts on Bostock?
Well, Constitution issues. I'm an advocate for disabled, and nobody mentioned the disability. They all went to the 64 Act. And everybody leaves out the 1990 Americans with Disabilities Act, just for constitutionally speaking. I disagree with Christy, and I agree with Byron. There's some area, but Constitution law, once it's law, it's the law of the land. And we got to uphold the rights of everybody. As a person that's protected under the ADA, I understand the transgender, I understand the right, but there's confusion there. But when it comes, Congress makes the laws, and we have to revisit it perhaps and straighten it out, because I grew up with friends. They were men when we grew up, and now they're not. So it's a conflicting area. It needs more work. I think it was an overreach. I think I got issues with it. I have issues with it. But as an advocate, I understand their perspective because I fought for the disabled for 35 years. You got accommodations here because of me. So I understand it, and I'd like to see, we're going to see a problem from it, but I'd like to see it work out because we're all Americans and nobody should be discriminated
Thank you
against.
very much. Thank you. I hope
Father Orsi, may I respectfully rebut since you did call me out by name and I lost 10
Oh, you
seconds?
want to respect? Okay, respectfully rebut.
All right, thank you. So I am going to have to pull my Juris Doctor card. The fact that I am a lawyer and I'm the only person that has studied the Constitution and am qualified to discuss this matter. Neil Gorsuch's opinion, if you've actually read it, I think everyone's talking on the surface level. You have to actually read the opinion. It is protecting also the protections for sex. That is a protected strict scrutiny standard. So it's not just sexual orientation, it's the fact that if you are not complying with what is normalized as your sex, then it's actually discrimination against sex, not just sexual orientation. So it is a protection. And to say that no person other than race has not experienced systemic discrimination is not true. As a woman, women were not even allowed to vote until the 1920s. So it's just—
Yeah, I think you rebutted enough. Anybody else want to rebut?
You over-rebutted.
You over-rebutted. Anybody else want to rebut? Go ahead. Go ahead.
But again, they didn't mention the disability. You see what I'm saying? Nobody mentioned the ADA.
Okay. Well, we'll keep that in mind. Okay.
Yes, Father.
Okay. Did we get everybody? Dr. Bob?
I think that's the final question, is it not, Pastor Rick?
Yes, I think out of respect to all the candidates and everybody, we better wrap this up. I really appreciate you guys and your answers. Thank you to the moderators. You were terrific as always, and we've all benefited from your good work today, and I want to really thank you for that. We want to turn now to closing statements because we want to give all the candidates the last word, shall we say. And the first one with the last word will be David Holden.
Thank you. And thank you for hosting these forums. They've been terrific, and it's been a wonderful experience to be able to meet with my Republican colleagues, as well as Dr. Cindy Banyai, to discuss the issues. We are in perilous times. We have a pandemic, economic fallout from that, environmental catastrophe, and the work of ending systematic racism as it exists today. We need new leadership in Washington, and we need new leadership in Florida. The Republicans have been in charge of this state for 20 plus years, and we've gone from being leaders across the board to being one of the laggards by almost every measure of progress. So we need to turn that around, and we need to build relationships between our representatives in Washington and our representatives in Tallahassee. I look forward to have the chance to serve the people of Southwest Florida. Thank you, David. Appreciate that. How about Daniel Kowal? Daniel, would you like your opportunity to make a closing statement?
Well, everybody, I'm Daniel Kowal. I'm running for Congress, DC 19. I'm a Republican, and I've learned something. I'm not a politician by no means. I'm a veteran law enforcement officer, and I've learned a lot over the last few months. I've been with you guys a few times, and I never realized how many organizations there are out there that have forums like every other day. And I think I figured it out, because I think over all these years of electing officials, all these other organizations, they want to vet these officials and see if they truly believe in the same way they believe, okay? And that's fine, that's great. We have a lot of issues in Southwest Florida that needs to be addressed, and we need to find out people's opinions and where they stand on them. But the sad part is, Washington, D.C. took a hard left about 19 years ago, and it's still turning left. And we got Nancy Pelosi and her liberal party running the House of Representatives right now. And we're only going to be one of 435 voices there, whoever makes it there. And it's going to be a hard road. And, to be honest, it's going to be hard to get a lot of these things in and get a lot of the things that Southwest Florida wants done. So that's why we have to make a difference in this election. We have to start sending patriots back to Washington, D.C. People that can't be swayed, people that can't be bought, people that don't work for special interests, people that only carry the voice of Southwest Florida, Washington, D.C. We need to start.
Thank you, Mr. Kowal. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
We turn now to Cindy Banyai. Dr. Banyai, closing statement.
Hi, thank you so much. So that's right. I am Dr. Cindy Banier, candidate for Congress for Florida Congressional District 19. I'm a mom and small business owner, and I'm fighting for our water, our health, and our community. And I absolutely agree with Daniel Kowal. We need to send somebody from Southwest Florida to Washington, D.C. to be the voice of the people. I am the person who has that commitment and qualifications to do that. I have a long term of service to organizations and people in this community. I am somebody who lives here. My kids live here. They go to school here. And I will not be bought or sold. No corporate PAC dollars. No one's in my back pocket except for the people of Southwest Florida. And I'll tell you what, I think we should need to really vet each candidate carefully and make sure that they actually have a platform and actually have history in Southwest Florida. And they're not just sitting there assailing others to help themselves. Really look at the qualifications. And if you want to see my qualifications, you can find them at cindy4southwestflorida.com. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you. Glad to have you here. Now, the other doctor, Dr. Fig.
Thank you, Rick. My name is Dr. William Figel-Stoller. I'm asking for your vote on August 18th to represent you in Congress. As an accomplished physician and surgeon in Southwest Florida for 25 years, I've treated tens of thousands of patients and their families, and I've dedicated my life to saving lives and service. And I'm not going to stop now. I will never quit. I'm asking for your vote for U.S. Congress District 19. I invite you to join me online at drfigforcongress.com and join our team of American First Conservatives. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Pleasure to have you with us, as is it with Darren. Darren, glad to have you here. Give you the opportunity.
I'm so happy to be here and thankful for this opportunity. As everybody knows, for 35 years out of New York, I've been serving this country and our vulnerable, successfully changing policy, modifying the policy, making those changes, even here in Southwest Florida before I got here, because the vulnerable have been excluded. Here, we have problems. Everyone else has been talking about supporting the president and their platforms. Mine has always been about the district and the issues. That's what I know. That's what I do. I'm Darren Aquino, the National Chief Advocate for Disabled Americans, Veterans, Police, Firemen, and Families. I'm running for Congress here, and now after the new poll, I'm leading by 2%. I'm the front runner, and I'm happy because my record is out there. They know me. They know me around the country. I will defend our district, and I will work with President Trump. But the district and Americans come first, because Washington is a crazy place and we're in challenging times, and we have to meet that challenge, and I will meet that challenge. I have met that challenge. I got 35 years and a wall full of presidents and letters, popes and pastors and clergy all around. Say, Darren, you're that guy. And I will be faithful to my community. I will be transparent. I will be loyal. But most of all, you'll be able to call me on the phone, something no congressman that we've ever had the opportunity to reach after they get into office. That changes with me. I got the calls today.
Thank you, Mr. Aquino. Thank you very much. Thank you,
Darren. We'll turn now to Christy McLaughlin.
Thank you. My name is Christy McLaughlin. My website is christyforcongress.com. Actually, since the beginning of my campaign, I have put my personal phone number, and it's available to everybody of Southwest Florida. We do need a representative that represents the people of Southwest Florida, and I'm the only person here who has been a lifelong resident. I've lived and breathed the issues of Southwest Florida every day of my life, and I never left. This is my home. I am a true constitutionalist, and that is what it means to be conservative. Even if it's making the tough decisions like Neil Gorsuch did, and people don't like it, but it is consistent with the Constitution. We need a true constitutionalist, and we need some fresh new voices. We just saw Madison Cawthorn win his primary. We are seeing a turn in DC because we don't want to continue down the swamp. We don't want to continue down this leftist, radical leftist turn that DC has taken. And the way we do that is having energetic, young, new voices that are going to implement term limits and protect Southwest Florida and America first. Thank you.
Thank you, Christy. Pleasure to have you here. And it's a pleasure to have you as well, Dan Severson, for a closing statement.
Thank you. It's been my privilege to serve my country for 22 years. I swore an oath to the Constitution to support and defend that Constitution, and I did it faithfully. I went to the Minnesota legislature and fought against liberal agendas, against things that we're experiencing here in Washington. This district is a +16, +18 red district that believes in the Constitution, believes in individual liberties, and believes in personal responsibility. I believe, because of my tested past, that I am the leader that this district needs to be that loud voice in Washington that will push up against the far left, against the progressive agenda that is set to take America down. And I'm a Navy Top Gun fighter, Severson for Congress. Please go to my website, take a look, and I would love to get together with you. If you have the inclination, give me a call. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks for joining us. Well, Byron, I guess you really do get the last word. So we're going to turn to you for a closing statement.
Well, listen, my name is Byron Donalds. I'm a candidate for United States Congress. I'm going to be on your ballot in a Republican primary this August 18th. Before we get into really the close, I want to thank, all of my opponents on the Republican side, and even Cindy and David for joining, because I think it's really the exchange of ideas that are critical, not just to the fabric of our country, but the future of it. I got involved in politics 10 years ago. I got started in the Tea Party movement because I didn't want to listen to the media. I just wanted to go and get involved and see what was actually going on. It's through that process I fell in love with our Constitution, and I became a constitutionalist. I've also had the ability to serve you in the Florida legislature the past 4 years. And so on the Republican side, you have 9 people running for Congress. You have many choices. What our area needs is a strong conservative, somebody that is going to uphold conservative principles, not think that they will, not hope that they will, that And there's only one candidate in this race that will always do that, whether it's standing against Republican leadership or even the left, and that's Byron Donalds, and I hope to have your vote. Go to byrondonalds.com. God bless you all and have a great evening.
Thank you, Byron. And thank you again to the moderators for your great work. We really appreciate your time and energy in this. And to all the candidates, we thank you for being here and sharing your ideas. I couldn't help thinking during the course of the forum how proud we are to be Americans when we can have these kinds of conversations. We know we won't agree with each other on everything. That's always obvious. But we have great conversations, and we are Americans, and we hash our differences out, and then we join together and go forward. And I want to thank all of you for being a part of that process and joining us here. For our audience, I want you to know this forum has been recorded, and in a day or so it will be posted on our website at flcaction.org. That's flcaction.org. You can find this forum, the previous forums posted there, and we'll also have additional voter information to help you make good decisions for the primary and beyond. So watch for that there and check it out. If we have any questions that we at the Florida Citizens Alliance can help with, we'll be glad to do that as well. We also invite you to go to our Florida Citizens Alliance website, goflca.com. You can learn more about what we do to improve education in Florida, how we work with the Department of Education and other groups to try to help our children have the best educational opportunities that we have for all of them. And thanks again for joining us. We have really enjoyed doing these forums for you. We hope you found them helpful and insightful. And may God bless America during these very stressing and stressful days. We need his help more than ever, and we pray that God would bless you and your family and keep you well during this time as well. So for the Florida Citizens Alliance, I want to thank you for joining us and wish you a great evening.